Hello and welcome to our audience joining us from around the world for South by Southwest panel, The Urgency for an Equitable Cannabis Industry. Say that 5 times fast. My name is Nicole Cosby. I'm the Chief Data and Compliance Officer for Philo. For those who aren't familiar, Philo is the leading provider of data, media, and compliance cloud solutions for highly regulated industries, including cannabis. A lot to cover, as you may imagine, under this banner of a topic. And so I want to start first by introducing my colleagues on this panel today and giving them an opportunity to let you know about a bit about themselves and who they are and the companies and organizations they're representing. How about we start with Khadijah?
Hi, Nicole. Hi, team. I am excited to be on this call and having this conversation about the urgency of equity now in the cannabis space. I currently am the VP for Corporate Social Responsibility for Curaleaf. As you know, as a multi-state operator, we like to pride ourselves on leading in the cannabis space with our strategies around Rooted in Good. So I'm happy to be able to talk about that a little bit later on. And yeah, excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. Meredith?
Hi, everybody. I am Meredith Mahoney, president of Lantern. Lantern is an e-commerce cannabis marketplace and delivery platform. We aggregate dispensary menus and bring discovery and safe access to consumers online. And I'm so excited to be here and sharing this stage with such an amazing group of people working on this very important issue. We have it as a core pillar of what we do at Lantern, and it's something we just think about every day and how we can better advance this important issue. So thank you for having me today.
Awesome. And last but certainly not least, Tahir.
Hey, thank you for the introduction. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Tahir Johnson. I currently serve as the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager at the National Cannabis Industry Association, the cannabis industry's oldest and largest trade association representing cannabis businesses, where I created and launched our Social Equity and Inclusion Scholarship Program, where we've brought in complimentary membership to over 100 social equity operators. I was a former financial advisor that came into the industry because I wanted to do good and help to make an impact. And it's a pleasure to be talking about this topic with you all today.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for joining the panel. I'm excited to just jump right in. And I think in our previous discussions, I think the best starting place is the word equitable or equity in and of itself. When you hear this word associated with panels, organizations, just a lot of activity in the industry, particularly in the media, when there's discussions around social equity and social justice related to the cannabis industry, I think equity means different things to different people. It means different things to different segments of the industry, whether you're in the private commercial sector, whether you're a nonprofit org, et cetera. So I would love to start by addressing, particularly from everybody's own individual vantage point, and then maybe even yourself personally, what equity kind of means to you, so to speak, particularly in the context of this conversation and where we are in the industry, from social equity to capital access to legalization, decriminalization, et cetera.
Well, I'd be glad to start in taking that one. So for me, when I think of equity, I really think of two things. First, when we look at the cannabis industry, we're talking about an industry in the US alone that made over $20 billion last year, and is projected to bring in over $40 billion of annual revenue within the next 5 years. People of color have a very little ownership, interest, and participation of that. In accordance to statistics, we're actually 3.5 times more likely to be arrested for cannabis at the same time while a multi-billion-dollar industry is being built. So when I think of equity, I think that it means two different things. One, equity, I think from the literal sense, most people think about ownership. And along with that ownership, I think that it means not only ownership, but participation, employment, job opportunities. But what it also means is that while we're building this multi-billion-dollar industry, we have people that are still sitting in jail today, people that are serving very long life sentences just for cannabis crimes that have been separated from their family, largely from the Black and brown community. And it's only right that if we're saying that it's fair for some people to, make billions of dollars for this, on the other hand, it should not be fair for people to still be sitting in prison for this. So we need to make sure that those same people not only have opportunities to participate in the industry, but also are, that we're freeing the prisoners that have been prosecuted for cannabis.
Do you just want us to jump in, Nicole? Is that okay?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, we could just roll it through.
Sure. I think that's an important question for sure. I like to think about at Curaleaf, we look through the lens of social equity in the context of the entire ecosystem, right? When I first came on board, it was the summer of 2020, which we all know the kind of reckoning we were having in this country. And many folks, rightfully so, start to question corporations and their commitments to communities of color. Curaleaf was not spared that question, and we chose to go internally and spend some time really understanding our culture and our capacity. And so for us, the lens of social equity, we use the lens of social equity to tackle 2 or 3 major issues that come up around this issue. One is access to ownership opportunities inside the industry, right? To make sure, I know we're going to talk about regulations a little bit later on, but to make sure that there are not systemic or institutional barriers that allow for people to participate. Capital, as Tahir said, is number one. But we also thought that there were opportunities for us as a company to engage directly in addressing the collateral consequences that come with being criminalized as a result of this plant. And so for us, the definition of social equity is how do you utilize the resources at your reach as a company to actually address collateral consequences in addition to the question of equity within the industry. Because let's face it, not everyone in every community impacted negatively by the war on drugs is interested in being a part of the cannabis space, but are they owed something as a part of how we make right the wrongs of the past?
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. Completely agree. Meredith, from your perspective, and also too at Lantern, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I think that Tahir and Khadija really covered so many of the important points, and I'll just add a few things from our vantage point. To me, it's about really doing all of the work and making sure that you're leaving no stone unturned, and that means really for people who have expertise in certain areas, really diving in and working on those things very deeply. So at Lantern, we're a startup. We're a team of people that have kind of come up through the Boston, New York startup scene. We know how to build businesses. So how do we create real material opportunities for our social equity partners to build real successful businesses? What's our role in that? It's not enough to create policy, because policy is just written on paper. We have to make sure that that policy gets turned into reality. We're going to say this 100 times today. Access to capital is probably the most important issue in terms of access to the industry. There are policies written today that are well-intended, but actually provide a lot of obstacles to entrepreneurs having access to capital. But from our vantage point at Lantern, we believe that, the way that we can contribute to a more equitable industry is to put the sweat equity into making sure that we're providing tools, guidance, access, legal help, support, moral support, whatever we can possibly do to really just help drive the entrepreneurial community in the states that we're operating in.
Definitely. I mean, it's fantastic hearing the different perspectives from where each of you sit individually, and I'm sure baked into it is, a lot of your own, personal thoughts and feelings addressing this industry as well. You mentioned, both you, Meredith and Khadija mentioned the regulatory aspect, and I want to kind of segue now into the legislative landscape, particularly the explosion, so to speak, that took place, or so the media made it seem, it took place with the last November election cycle. When it's noteworthy, again, that 5 states actually passed some form of legalization in the legislative in the last election cycle. New Jersey, Arizona, Montana, South Dakota, and Mississippi have all of all places, pass some form of legislation. It's notable, but it's also too kind of eye-opening because, you know, as that, and I'm going to pose some questions about the challenges to this rollout as well, but, you know, just laying that foundation, we're now opening ourselves up. And I saw a stat that now 1/3 of the US population lives in a jurisdiction with some form of legalized cannabis, you know, and that for adult use or medical purposes. That's significant considering where the country was on this issue just a few years ago. But as fast and kind of, you know, monumental as this push for legalization, so to speak, has been across the state and various local levels, is it too much too fast when you then dig into what some of this legislation actually says? Or Mario, to your point, how hands are tied by this fast rollout of regulations where I've seen, I mean, New Jersey is one example, going back in and having to backtrack and you know, re-argue and you know, reestablish what this means to provide access to licenses, to provide access to funding, to where these financial allocations are going to be placed, and the challenges and hurdles to actually stand up a business under this so-called legalization. There's not a hard question in there, but I would love to get your thoughts, particularly from your individual points where you're sitting, on some of the challenges you've seen to some of this exciting legislation that's rolled out across some states. And then Khadija, do you want to tackle that one first?
Sure. So I like the way the language you use, exciting legislation. Probably exciting to all of us here because we are probably more like policy wonks. But I can tell you that earlier this year, the leadership team in Curaleaf were meeting, and we were discussing what are we going to do to add on to our Rooted in Good strategy that gets at the heart of some of the things that, you know, stakeholder groups were coming to us around this idea of expungement and employment opportunities for individuals from the formerly incarcerated community. And so we were challenged with how are we going to commit a percentage of our new hires to go to target folks from that particular community. How can we make this happen? So our GR team actually went and looked at all of the regs in states that we are operating. And we found out that we can only actually engage individuals from the formerly incarcerated community and employment opportunities in 10 out of the 23 states. So to any major MSO that's looking to really address access at an employment issue for folks specific to that community are already limited by where they can actually do that. And in some cases for us, it's a concern if our parent company is doing an aggressive outreach and bringing individuals into all parts of our organization, does that put us in jeopardy in a state that does not recognize the value of second chance employment opportunities for people who have been a part of the criminal justice system, right? So in the state of Florida, there's no way to make that happen. And so we're approaching it from a bifurcated answer. One, in the states that we can do it in, we're going to set up shop, and we are aggressively looking at partners on the ground in those states to help us get the word out and penetrate a community pipeline of individuals coming into the industry through those outreach. And the second is we're going to have to unleash our GR influence in those states to have those legislators reconsider that kind of language that's exclusionary. I think one of the things that we saw with the MORE Act, that it had that kind of exclusionary language in it, and was one of the reasons at Curaleaf we appreciated all of the work that had been done around the MORE Act, but quite honestly, we couldn't support some of the provisions because they would harm the very things that our community is telling us that we need. So that's just one example.
Yeah, definitely.
I'll jump in next because something you just said really relates to my thoughts on this. I think that I'm going to make a statement here. I can't back up, but I'm going to make a guess. I think the white electorate, when they vote on ballot initiatives for cannabis, are voting for the end of prohibition for a substance that they enjoy using. They generally do not understand everything we are talking about today. My personal experience is there as well. I have learned, in the past 5 years, met so much about this topic and why it's so important, why legalization really does need to happen. So with that thought, there is a disconnect between, I think, the legalization of the plant at the state level and then what really needs to happen to create an equitable or I guess something that's approaching an equitable approach to the industry. And so the states have to take the lead here. They can't rely on, they can't rely, I guess, on the electorate pushing it. They need to rely on, people like Khadijah, your group, and all of the great government relations work. They need to establish specific policies and specific frameworks. And I don't think it's hard. I know it's hard because there's a lot of people involved, but it's priority licensing, it's state administered or private partnerships around incubator programs. It's making sure that there's access to capital, either through creating funds for the applicants or, public-private partnerships, and establishing state definitions of social equity. I think that, as we're seeing legalization roll out across the country, the states they have to take the right policy stand on this and make sure that the operational pieces that come after it can support it in a way that creates meaningful opportunities for access points into the industry. And sort of to bring it around to Lantern, we are an e-commerce and delivery company, and delivery is actually a great access point for social equity applicants and parts of, the community there. It's lower capital intensive, easier to get a business off the ground. And so just the simple, it's funny to say something simple, but this simple act of including delivery in regulations is a great way to provide an access point there.
Yeah, definitely. To hear from your side, from I want to say an industry org perspective as well, and work that NCIA is doing, as well as other organizations that you're working with. How effective or how challenging has it been from your side then? Because I'm sure part of your org's mandate as well is working hand in hand with a lot of the state, local, and federal governments and in federal government in order to implement a less biased and more even playing field in the legislation that's being passed.
Absolutely, and I would love to talk about that on both a federal and on a state level. So first, when we look at on a federal level, we're at a place where Gallup polls around November last year showed that almost 68% of Americans are in support of legalization of cannabis, and those numbers came to play out, right? Where we saw 5 states actually legalize cannabis. One of them was where I grew up in New Jersey, as we see that kind of playing out. On a national level, we saw where cannabis was made essential in the wake of coronavirus. People are trying to look at it for how can they monetize it. What does this mean for social equity? I think that it's important as we look at legalization for, that we look at making sure that we have access to the plant and that we can get the funding, that social equity is not an afterthought and not left behind. What does that mean for organizations like mine? I think that we see so many groups popping up that are focused on social equity. But as Khadijah said, I think the MORE Act was a great example. I know that many of us that were advocates leading up to that bill passing the day before were actually fighting for, some of those things that we knew were in there that were harmful, that the necessary general public didn't understand. And part of the reason for that is I think that it's very important that as people are crafting this legislation that is well-intentioned, that they are actually getting the feedback and the voices and representation from the communities that they plan to represent. If you want to help fix social equity and you want to help represent these people from these businesses in social equity, people that have been doing this work need to have a voice and a seat at the table. And I think that as we go forward and look at legislation, that's one of the most important things. And so that's why for me, as I was, take NCIA for an example, it's the oldest and largest trade association. And, in full transparency, we haven't always had the greatest record on being inclusive. So when I took the reins of this organization, I knew that it was not only important if we're going to focus on these issues to bring these people into the organization. So again, we have over 100 people of our membership that are purely from the social equity community. When we go to lobby, we have their voices behind us, where we're getting their actual opinion. When we look at our board of directors, for me, it was important to make sure that I could have actual social equity operators, people of color come into our board of directors, people that are actually making decisions. When we look at our committees that are our voices that represent cannabis on all different policy in every segment of the industry, it was important to have diversity there. So again, I think that as we talk about policy, I think it's important to have stakeholders from these communities that we want to represent that have really also, bared the brunt of the war on drugs. That's why I love seeing like someone like Khadija at the head of corporate social responsibility at a company like Curaleaf, because she's from the community. She understands, like she knows what it represents. And she even brings that into the corporation. So it takes, corporate, like was said by Meredith, these public-private partnerships to be able to be successful. But it takes representation from these communities in all aspects of it if we're really going to, get to the finish line the way we need to.
Definitely, definitely. In everybody's response, it was also triggering a little something for me. And I don't want to stray too far from our notes and things we discussed and throw folks a curveball, but also too, I know, again, as I mentioned before, the media is and the kind of nature of what media is. And I'm not just talking about, the 6 o'clock news. I'm talking about the constant stream of Facebook information and Instagram information. The excitement is palpable from this type of activity happening in the cannabis industry from the business side as well as the legislative activity. But there's also just a flurry of just random information out there that I think is also too detrimental to a lot of people of color, first-time business owners, young entrepreneurs trying to navigate this process. How do they know about NCIA? How do they, find out that Khadija exists at Curaleaf? How do they know that Lantern is friendly to, businesses who are seeking to stand themselves up under social equity programs? I know from where I sit and my vantage point at Philo, we're based on an information first, for profit, of course, but we are a regulatory database that's trying to house all of this myriad of changes of legislative and regulatory activity. And I feel like there is oftentimes a kind of disconnect or misinformation out there for so many folks. And then it's going back to where we started, including policymakers, including these representatives, these state and local representatives. If you sit down, and as Khadija mentioned, being a policy wonk, sit down and read some of this legislation. Some of it doesn't even make sense in practice. And I'm like, I feel like the little kid on the commercial. I'm like, this is not how any of this works. This is not how any of this works. Like, this cannot functionally work for this type of license structure, which I see is now in a situation. And I mentioned earlier when we spoke in Illinois, how they're sitting on a $31 million grant and they don't know how to allocate the money because of they've tied themselves up in their own policy and regulations. So my whirlwind here and throwing all this out, coming from what we know are the challenges, what do you see and it could be specific examples, either in your interaction within the states where you're engaged or businesses are engaged, or to hear for where your org is working particularly. What do you see working? What areas or what types either could be specific to a certain type of legislation that is kind of gaining fire, gaining hold and traction across myriad of states, or an example of a state and or local government that is kind of doing it right from a legislative perspective. Don't know who wants to tackle that one first. I can see grins.
Well, I know that is definitely a loaded question. One, because one of the things I'll say, actually, one of the questions that I get asked the most often is, if you look at a social equity program, what is an example of who's doing it right? What's the best solution? And what I always say is, I know people talk a lot about the failings of Illinois system, but there are some great things within there that you could take out of it and place somewhere else. You look at jurisdictions like Oakland, And there are things from there that you could take. Massachusetts, for example, just recently, one of the things they did with their delivery licenses was making sure that there's priority for, priority for social equity applicants. And that was something that's, a great piece of, legislation. And I think it takes, again, making sure that we understand and we prioritize that as we are focused on legalization, that part of what we're doing is this restorative and reparative justice, and that these people should have these opportunities. I think often, people may think, some people may have a perception of a negative perception and think it's like affirmative action, or they're given a handout. But, I think that already, again, these challenges that these entrepreneurs are facing, and given the circumstances and history of cannabis, is the right thing to do.
Yes. I chuckle because, I've been someone who every time some new legislation comes out, I'm trying to eat it up to determine, is this the model, right? And what I have decided is the model is the process, not necessarily the outcome, right? Because social equity in LA may look a lot different in Alabama. But if we can establish a standardization around how we get there, like a set of protocols, a set of questions, a set of people at the table that is consistent across the board, to your point, Nicole, you have to have people part of the process who understand the industry, right? And I think in order to get social equity right, to your point to here, we have to have more voices from that said community at the table when we are, the sausage making, right? And so there have been, I think, success. And I think when I look at where Oakland started to where Oakland is now, you can see that the activists never let up, which is difficult because in most cases for folks who identify as individuals from the social equity community, they are both the activist and the entrepreneur. And when you're focused in that advocate space, you are definitely missing some of the things that you need to be paying attention to as an entrepreneur. And so for me, I would love to see more organization structures and growth. Obviously I'm going to plug Marijuana Matters because I think that there's an incredible toolkit that team put together that gives folks an honest kind of assessment of what's happening. It was a moment in time. It's already outdated from just 7 months ago. But at least at that time, you can see what was happening in the landscape. And more importantly, give you guys, who's ever reading it, an opportunity to digest the process, the questions that are important to ask. And organizations like Uplift out of Maryland that's now going national, they are changing the conversation specifically in, what I like to call our HBCU community, right? It is inviting more people to this conversation. And when people like to hear, and you, Nicole, we are saying the waters are safe. Come in. So I would love to see more opportunities for us across our organizations or across our disciplines to have these kinds of very honest and authentic conversations so we can create something that I think will be absolutely life-changing by the time federal legalization comes. So sorry for that long-winded way.
That was perfect.
I love what you just said, Khadija, about when activists and entrepreneurs kind of come together, because that's what I think is working from my vantage point. We're both in Massachusetts, and to hear you mention Massachusetts, it's just been incredibly inspiring and motivating and energizing to see what the social equity community here has been able to enable and put together and really advocate for over the past 6 months. They were able to get the warehouse delivery license approved. They were able to stand up to, pretty powerful dispensary association. They've just really come together quickly. And to me, this idea of activist meets entrepreneur, there's no stopping that. That's what's going to kind of push through all of the rest of this, BS, I guess. I don't know what I could say here, but I'm sure I can say it. But I think that the other thing that I think is interesting is as long as we believe that it can work on the other side of the policy, I think that's enough to keep goodness going. So for instance, in Massachusetts, here you mentioned, we have the 3-year exclusive period for third-party delivery for adult use. It's not necessarily working well yet. There has not been a license issued for that. It's been a very lengthy process. Access to capital is a problem. You name it, there is an operational issue, but we believe that there are pieces of that are really important that we went and advocated for in Denver and Aurora, and they've adopted, Denver has adopted that same model. So do we know the right way to roll that out? Not yet. Is Denver going to make mistakes? And Massachusetts certainly has, yes, but we believe in the premise enough that there should be exclusivity periods, there should be carve outs, certain license types should be available only to social equity. I think as long as we can agree that the premise is there and it's important to advocate for, and we have commitment on the other side to the operational pieces, that's just a really important thing to establish.
Definitely. I want to, we've got we're kind of very efficient with the time here, and I want to throw out a softball question before I get into like the looking forward, 2021 and beyond. And I think in different aspects of everybody's, responses and statements, we keep touching on the capital aspect, and we know Safe Banking Act has been floating out there in the ether forever. It feels like various iterations, getting to certain points, dying based on bipartisan lines, et cetera. Not necessarily sure, again, if you're a wonk and you read through it, not necessarily sure if it's a bad thing that it's died when it's died, because there are definitely some issues there. But I'm just curious to get anybody's thoughts and feedbacks on so let's say when that magic door to capital opens, when you can get, walk into Citibank and get a small business loan for your business, when that you can start banking and accepting all the credit cards in your dispensaries, and it's not a cash business where half your money is going to security system. When that gate opens, what is the blessing or the curse that then is going to be impacted to these areas, as Tahir mentioned, redressing the harm to adversely impact the communities. The small business guy are they going to be, drowned by the wave of folks who already have the capital in their back pocket and now can legitimize it through safe banking? Or is it really truly going to be a path to opportunity to start leveling the playing field in these quote unquote social equity programs? I'd love to hear anybody's thoughts on this one.
Sure. And I'd love to talk about safe banking. And during my time at NCIA, I'd have to say that seeing safe banking pass through the House is probably one of the greatest accomplishments in the cannabis industry that I've seen. I actually got the chance to be there, like at the press conference and everything when it was happening. And so I'll say that I think that safe banking does have an opportunity to, for the minority community to, help put some capital into the community. But I think as somebody who also came from finance, with this in mind, I don't want us to have the illusion that all of a sudden these banks being able to provide capital to the industry necessarily means that it's going to, open a tap of generous money coming into the minority community. Because if we look at the banking system as it currently exists, even outside of cannabis, these challenges of access to capital, redlining, all these things are very big issues that currently exist. One of the other things that I think in terms of capital is and this is going back to the finance a little bit and something that I was always cognizant of in finance, I think in order to reach those minority communities, it also takes diversity on that end to be able to build the trust between these financial institutions as well. But certainly, again, safe banking should have some positive impact to be able to add finance to the community. But I think it's just important that when we look at it from an equity standpoint, again, that we keep these policies in mind and make sure that as well as capital coming into the industry, that there can be mechanisms for capital to be able to go to minority and social equity entrepreneurs as well.
Well, I definitely have some thoughts. As a matter of fact, my team and I put out a call a couple of weeks ago to begin meeting with people from the Black banking community. If anybody knows how to get in touch with Killer Mike, tell him to call me.
I do, actually.
Because he's got the bank movement in Georgia.
His partner Ryan Glover. Yeah, I can put you in touch.
So yeah, please, because one of the things I've said to our folks and to the team's credit, they was like, Khadijah, tell us what that looks like, right? And so I'd love to hear this group, and I don't know if we have time today, but some of the things that I thought was, can we add some provisions as a part of this Safe Banking Act, that dollars go to the SBA to support minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, folks who are underrepresented? Can we set aside and make sure that Black banks and banks in the Hispanic community have access to, sequestered dollars to do financial management to help? Unless 280 is going away in the next 2 years, I think entrepreneurs that are planning to get in the space, they need an awakening in understanding what 280E means for their bottom line and how it impacts them, right? And I don't think a lot of folks from the community that I've talked to really understand that piece. And so I think there is some financial education that could be a part of the bill that would make sense in terms of social equity. And quite honestly, I'd love to see dollars put aside for HBCUs and research. We cannot allow this moment. It's an economic argument for sure, but we have also the potential to miss the opportunity for a health and wellness conversation to communities that have health inequities all across this country, primarily African Americans and those from the Hispanic community. So I think there's ways to make it better.
Definitely.
The only thing I'll add here, because I think that you two covered it perfectly, is that the possibility of safe banking on the horizon just creates an even more urgent imperative for priority licensing, so that we can have social equity owned businesses have a head start before more institutional players can get into the market, whether that be, big public delivery companies or more marketplaces. Like, we need to make sure that the social equity owners have a head start building their market share and their businesses.
Right. And in terms of safe banking, I just want to add that I think it's important that we do work on this legislation, because with this particular piece, I don't think it's a if, but when. This was probably the most bipartisan issue that you saw. The day that it passed in the House, they were also having a Trump impeachment trial, and they were able to vote and get it through. So I think it's important that we're prepared, and that we're thinking about it that way.
Definitely. There's so many layers to it. I feel like that could be a separate topic in and of itself. I want to segue into kind of our final kind of looking ahead portion, and something Khadijah for me actually triggered kind of the look ahead in the future. It's definitely, and it kind of ties in a lot of these aspects. So as we mentioned before we start, there's misinformation, or just a ton of information when it comes to navigating the regulatory landscape at the state or local level. And then getting past those areas, understanding the entrepreneurial aspects of setting up a business in and of itself. Then you're navigating the financial waters, be it through what's enacted or what's not enacted, and how to establish yourself when it comes to just local banking and SBA loans, et cetera. But then at the bottom line, it's where did you start, and what kind of foundation are we laying for this industry and to enable folks to successfully move into this industry? The portion for me in looking ahead about HBCUs, I think is a critical one. What I have seen on the horizon in the past year or two, which is good to see, but I'd love to see it expand into other areas. You see particularly HBCUs in states with an agricultural setting. I know Clark Atlanta University has a program that they're offering even for externally, where you can get a certification, but it's again towards grow and cultivation. Same kind of program is being looked to start up at Lincoln, and I believe also too at FAMU. So there's some that the kind of wheels are starting to churn about the opportunities and the path to opportunity and where it needs to start. Khadijah, to your point as well, I would love to see those kind of programs expand into the health and wellness and into the medical programs and the STEM programs, and have that education incorporated. So for me, my look ahead is is really education on all aspects, providing access. I feel like Philo is now moving into that path of not just providing a service of a regulatory database, to the lawyers who are powering the businesses and the compliance teams and brands, but extending our access to information to new business owners and future business programs, et cetera. And would love to partner with some universities on that. From each of you guys, where do you see, from your lens, the kind of future of this industry as it relates to bringing a more equitable industry?
Yeah, so I'll start with this one, and I'll say, for me, first of all, I'm a proud Howard University alum. For everybody out
Me too.
there.
HU.
HU.
But,
when I came into the cannabis industry, one of the first things that I thought of is, again, as a Howard alum, and I looked at, just for one, the way a school like Howard, the way HBCUs prepared us for the world, the way I saw like my classmates go on to conquer every different industry, whether it were entertainment or advocacy or technology or all these different things. I've been a firm believer that one of the best ways to penetrate and actually, make some change in the industry, HBCUs can be one of those primary vehicles. Even back when we didn't have access to education, it was our HBCUs that trained the Black leaders of America. And I'm so thankful for, again, like I think that programs like Southern University, Dr. Shonda, they have the partnership there where they actually are, working on cannabis. Like you said, schools like FAMU, they're getting active. The Spelman University had me come speak virtually to the ladies at Delta Sigma Theta there last week. So it's great to see these HBCUs having this conversation. And I think that part of it's breaking the stigma around cannabis, helping our people to become educated, understanding these opportunities, but also making sure that we understand when we look at cannabis, it's not just owning a dispensary or owning a cultivation. All these different skills that we have, if you went to school, if you're at, Howard Medical, or, you're at Morehouse studying law, or you're at one of these other schools, I want you to think about how you can use those to transition and take advantage of this multi-million-dollar industry, right? Somebody like Khadijah, she came from the policy world. Like, there's all these different backgrounds and ways that we need you to use it and mobilize our skills to be able to come together and do the work that we need to be done in the industry.
Well, I'll just say we should all pitch some universities like a tour. And so we can actually speak to some of the minds that are coming out. One of the things that I wrote down, I wanted to do a hackathon, quite honestly, right? So this is to answer your question about how I feel about the future of cannabis and how we make sure that it is inclusive of as many people that want to be a part of this industry as possible. But my idea, my dream is to be able to host a hackathon between leading Ivies, leading HBCUs to hack this real question of what it means to have a socially responsible cannabis industry. I mean, I think there are a number of ways we can go, but I think, consumer safety, access to individuals that are from diverse and different backgrounds. How do we include the veterans? I would love to just do a 48-hour hackathon and see young people solve something that we haven't been able to solve just yet. So future's bright, in my opinion.
Please invite me to that. I want to watch that. My comments here again continue to just ride off of Tahir and Khadijah's comments. I think starting earlier with younger people who are contemplating their careers and really making this a very integrated career path with anything else they may be thinking about is important. And then I always think about the saying, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And so really elevating Black owners, women owners, veteran owners, thought leaders, policy leaders, and making sure that the cannabis really has the respect and credibility of any other industry, and making sure we're really elevating those leaders and giving them a lot of visibility to not just the cannabis community, but the broader community.
Do we think we're going to see federal legalization under Biden-Harris?
Well, I'll say that it's hard to say when, but just last week, or I'm sorry, just this week rather, The Senate, Chuck Schumer, Cory Booker, Ron Wyden just proposed a new bill working towards federal legalization with social equity in mind. So I'll say that I'm a firm believer that I think it's closer than a lot of people think.
Yeah.
I can't necessarily say it's going to happen this year, but personally, if it did happen within the next 4 years in this administration, I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't bet and say that it's going to happen, but I'll say if it did, I would not be surprised.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it would 2022. I mean, I think I was saying this at the Kennedy School. I was like, I think we're 3 to 5 years out, and that year 2022 would put us about at 5 years, because I think the Senate has I think we have a real big opportunity in the Senate to really challenge the administration, right? And I think with the right folks in place in 2022, that we could very well see a federal legalization bill before the next presidential election.
If I had to answer that question, I probably would have phoned either Tahir or Khadija to hear what they had to say. So I don't think I could say anything more insightful than they did.
Yeah, I think the next 4 years are going to be eye-opening. Again, from where we started this conversation with, I feel like the speed of legislation that's happening at the state level. I think we're about to see, especially coming out of that last election cycle, a lot of FOMO, a lot of fear of missing out, and the neighboring states that you saw in the last election cycle are then going to spur or either expand on stagnant legislation they may have. So I feel like, across where we're all sitting is going to be an exceptionally busy year. I mean, that's good. That's a good thing for the industry. It also makes me nervous. Like, what are folks ready to bear? And how soon are we going to see some of that, possibly kind of big whale action on M&A front start to take off with so much activity before kind of the little guys have had a chance to get their feet wet, and then when it's that barrier to entry going to start getting harder. But it's exciting. It's exciting industry. I feel excited by each of you here as panelists and everything that's happening on your space. I would love for not only all of us, but I'm hoping this conversation and the audience who has an opportunity to view it has walked away with food for thought, as well as a chance to drive deeper connections across the industry, from learning more about organizations, more about the different panels that are discussing this topic, access to information that not only Philo provides, but other resource groups and organizations, and just completely heartened by the existence of Khadija and even other companies who are bringing in and kind of re-examining what corporate social responsibility looks like and should look like for this industry, as well as the communities that they serve. So I want to wrap and thank everyone for joining this panel today. I think it's been an incredible conversation that I'm sure could go on forever. But thank you so much.
Thank you. Such a thoughtful interview. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. It was absolutely a pleasure to be here. And for folks out there listening, to keep up, follow me on social media at the cannabis-diversity-report.com. Check out my podcast.
Good plug. Good plug.